You want to know what real silence sounds like? It's not the absence of noise. It's the moment when a courtroom full of people suddenly realizes they've been watching a predator feast on innocence. It's the sound of a judge's gavel freezing midair when he sees a ghost from his past walk through those heavy wooden doors. It's the crack in a daughter-in-law's smirk when she realizes her game just ended. I stood in that doorway, my old leather folder clutched against my chest like armor, and watched my son struggle to take his seat on those damn crutches. Clara, that's what I'll call her, though she doesn't deserve the dignity of a name, sat there with that satisfied little smile playing across her lips. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd broken him completely. She thought no one would ever stand up for my boy. But then Judge Morrison's eyes found mine. 23 years had passed since we'd last faced each other across a courtroom, and I watched the recognition dawn on his face like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Mrs. Valdez," he whispered, his voice carrying across that sacred space like a prayer. "Why are you here?" The temperature in that room dropped 10 degrees. I swear I could see Clara's confidence evaporating like morning mist. She had no idea who she was about to face. No idea that the quiet little mother-in-law she'd been dismissing for months had once made grown men confess their sins just by looking at them. Before I tell you what happened that day, before I tear open this wound that's been festering in my soul, I need you to understand something. Truth doesn't die in silence. It just waits. It gathers strength in the darkness, feeding on injustice until it's strong enough to roar. And when it finally speaks, heaven and earth move to listen. I walked to that seat beside my broken son, feeling every eye in that courtroom follow me. My boy, my beautiful, gentle boy, looked up at me with those same brown eyes I'd kissed goodnight for 28 years. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking like it did when he was 12 and the bullies had cornered him again. "You shouldn't have come." I set my folder down between us and placed my weathered hand over his trembling fingers. "I came," I said quietly, "because the law forgot who taught it its backbone. You see, there are secrets buried in every family. Stories we tell ourselves to survive the unbearable weight of truth." For 2 years, I'd watched my son disappear piece by piece, and I'd told myself it was grief. I'd convinced myself that the accident had broken more than his body, that maybe Clara was right to grow distant, maybe he really had become a burden. But mothers know. Deep in our bones, in that place where love lives alongside fury, we know when our children are being devoured by wolves in sheep's clothing. Let me take you back, because you need to understand how we got here. You need to see the foundation that was built with blood and tears and midnight studying sessions, because without that foundation, none of what happened next makes sense. 30 years ago, I was nobody special. Just another young mother in Milwaukee, living in a house so small you could hear your own heartbeat echo off the walls. My husband, David's father, he left on a Tuesday morning in February. Kissed me goodbye like any other day, went to work, and never came home. Found out later he'd been planning it for months. Had another woman, another life waiting for him 3 states away. I was 26 years old with a 9-year-old son and $17 in my checking account. You want to know what desperation tastes like? It tastes like generic cereal for dinner and pride swallowed with tap water. But I had something that man never understood. I had fire in my belly and steel in my spine. My mother didn't raise me to lie down and die just because life knocked me flat. So I got up. I worked double shifts at the courthouse clerk's office during the day, watching lawyers strut around in their $1,000 suits, thinking they owned justice. At night, while David did his homework at our tiny kitchen table, I studied law books I checked out from the library. "Why are you reading those boring books, Mama?" he'd ask, his pencil hovering over math problems. Because someday I'd tell him, we're going to need someone to fight for us. And it might as well be me. For years. For years of 18-hour days and coffee that could strip paint. For years of watching my boy grow up too fast because his mama was always tired, always stressed, always one unpaid bill away from disaster. But when I walked across that stage and they handed me my law degree, when I saw my 13-year-old son cheering in the crowd with tears streaming down his face, I knew every sacrifice had been worth it. I started small, family law mostly, helping other women who'd been abandoned, other children who needed someone to speak for them when the world had forgotten they mattered. I wasn't flashy, wasn't the kind of lawyer who made headlines. But I won cases. I fought for the forgotten, and I never lost sight of why I'd started this journey. David, my beautiful boy, he took a different path. While I was building my career in the courtroom, he was building things with his hands. Started working construction at 16, said he wanted to create something solid, something that would last. By the time he was 25, he owned his own company. Small jobs at first, but honest work. Clean work. Mama, he said one day, standing in my little rental apartment with blueprints spread across my coffee table, I'm going to build you a house. A real house, with a garden and a porch where you can drink your coffee in the morning. And he did. My God, he did. Spent 2 years planning it, saving every penny, calling in favors. When he handed me those keys, when I walked through that front door for the first time, I broke down and cried right there in the living room. Now no one can evict us from peace again, I whispered. He was 30 when he met Clara. Sweet little thing, or so I thought. Worked at the bank, had a smile that could light up a room. She seemed to genuinely care about him, seemed to understand that beneath all those muscles and calloused hands was the gentlest soul you'd ever meet. When she got pregnant with Sophia, my granddaughter, I thought I was watching a fairy tale unfold. The wedding was small but beautiful. David looked so happy, so proud. Clara glowed in her white dress, promising to love and cherish him in sickness and in health. I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. For 5 years, it was good. Sophia was the light of our lives, bright, curious, always asking questions that made us all think deeper. David's business grew. Clara seemed content with their life. We had Sunday dinners together, holidays filled with laughter. I thought we'd finally found our happy ending. But life has a way of testing every foundation, doesn't it? And on a cold Thursday morning in March, our foundation cracked wide open. The accident wasn't anyone's fault, just one of those terrible things that happen when gravity and bad timing collide. David was inspecting a roof beam when it gave way. 30-foot fall onto concrete. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive, lucky to walk again at all. But luck is a relative thing when you're watching your child learn to take his first steps all over again at 35 years old. The physical therapy was brutal. Months of pain and frustration, watching my strong son struggle to do things that used to be as natural as breathing. His left leg never quite worked the same after that. A permanent limp, weakness that flared up when he was tired or stressed. The business suffered because he couldn't do the physical work anymore, couldn't be on site the way he used to be. But it was Clara's reaction that broke my heart. At first, she seemed supportive. Drove him to appointments, helped him with exercises. But as the weeks turned to months, as it became clear that this wasn't something he was just going to bounce back from, I started to see changes. Little things at first. The way she'd sigh when he asked for help reaching something. The impatience in her voice when he moved too slowly. The way she'd scroll through her phone during dinner while he struggled to cut his food with one hand holding his fork and the other bracing against the table. Maybe if you'd worked less and thought more, she said one evening, her voice dripping with contempt, you wouldn't be like this. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia looked up from her plate, confusion and hurt written across her 7-year-old face. David just sat there, his jaw clenched, taking it like he deserved it. I wanted to say something. God, how I wanted to reach across that table and shake some sense into her. But I held my tongue. Told myself it was stress, told myself she was grieving the life she'd planned too. Told myself it wasn't my place to interfere in their marriage. What a fool I was. It got worse. The little barbs became daily occurrences. She'd mock his slowness, his need for rest, his inability to do the physical labor that had once defined him. She'd make jokes about his gimpy leg in front of friends, then act like it was all in good fun when he flinched. You're too sensitive, she'd tell him. It's not like you're actually disabled. But he was. Not in the way the world sees disability. He could walk, he could work, he could function. But something in his spirit had broken along with his body, and she was grinding the pieces under her heel every single day. I watched my confident, capable son shrink into a shadow of himself. He stopped talking about work, stopped making plans for the future. He'd sit in my living room on Sunday afternoons, staring out the window while Sophia played at his feet, and I could see the weight of worthlessness settling on his shoulders like snow. Maybe she's right, he said one day, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. Maybe I am just a burden now. That's when I knew I had to do something. But I never imagined how bad things really were until that night in late October when my world cracked open completely. I'd gone over to their house to watch Sophia while they went to a parent-teacher conference. Clara had insisted they didn't need me, but David quietly asked me to come anyway. Sophia had been having nightmares, he said. Waking up crying, asking for me. They left around 7. Sophia and I made cookies and watched cartoons until her bedtime. I was tucking her in when I heard Clara's car in the driveway. They were back earlier than expected. I was gathering my things when I heard voices in the kitchen. Something in Clara's tone made me freeze. I crept closer to the kitchen doorway, my heart pounding. What I heard still haunts my dreams. Listen to me carefully, Sophia, Clara was saying, her voice low and urgent. Tomorrow, you're going to talk to a nice man called a judge. He's going to ask you some questions about mommy and daddy. What kind of questions? Sophia's small voice was confused, frightened. He's going to ask who takes better care of you. And you're going to say mommy, okay? You're going to tell him that daddy scares you sometimes. But mommy, daddy doesn't scare me. Daddy never scares me. There was a pause, and when Clara spoke again, her voice was ice cold. Then you'll lie if you love me. Do you love mommy, Sophia? The sob that came from my granddaughter's throat was like a knife through my heart. I stood there in that hallway, my hands trembling around my purse, listening to a mother poison her own child's innocence. I don't want to lie, Sophia whispered. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, Clara said. And sometimes little girls have to help their mommies. If you don't help me, Sophia, Daddy might take you away from me forever. Is that what you want? No, Sophia cried. I want to stay with both of you. Well, that's not how it works. So you'll do what mommy says, won't you? I heard my granddaughter's broken yes and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The mother in me wanted to burst through that door and scream until the walls came down. But the lawyer in me, the prosecutor who'd built her career on evidence and strategy, she held me back. This was war. And if Clara wanted to fight dirty, she was about to learn that she'd picked the wrong family to destroy. I slipped out the back door while they were still talking, my mind already racing through possibilities. 23 years I'd been out of the courtroom, 23 years since I'd hung up my prosecutor's badge to focus on family law. But some skills never fade. Some instincts never die. The next morning, I made a phone call to Miguel Cortez, retired detective, old ally, the kind of man who believed that justice wasn't just a word painted on courthouse walls. If anyone could help me gather the evidence I needed, it was Miguel. Rosa, he said when he heard my voice. Haven't heard from you in years. What's wrong? I told him everything. The accident, the emotional abuse, the custody case Clara was planning to file. When I got to the part about Sophia being coached to lie, I heard him curse in Spanish. What do you need? He asked. Everything, I said. I need to know who's funding this case, who's advising her, what her real plan is. And I need it yesterday. Miguel had always been thorough, but what he uncovered over the next 2 weeks was beyond anything I'd expected. Clara wasn't just trying to win custody, she was trying to steal everything David had built. The house, the business, even his reputation. Turns out she'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Had hooked up with some real estate developer who wanted David's construction company for the land and equipment. The divorce was just step one. Get custody of Sophia, claim the house was unsafe for a child because of David's instability, force a sale that would benefit her new boyfriend's development plans. The money trail was there if you knew where to look. Secret meetings, cash payments, a web of lies so complex it made my head spin. She'd been playing the long game, positioning herself as the victim while slowly destroying my son's confidence and credibility. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the depth of a mother's love and the memory of a prosecutor's training. The paperwork was filed on a Monday. David came to my house that evening, the custody petition shaking in his hands. "She's taking Sophia," he said, his voice hollow. "Says I'm an unfit parent. Says the accident made me unstable, that I'm a danger to my own daughter." I took those papers and read every word, my anger building with each lie, each twisted truth. Clara was asking for full custody, supervised visitation only, child support that would bankrupt him, and first right of refusal on the house if he couldn't maintain payments. "She's trying to take everything," David whispered. "Everything we built, everything we worked for. And maybe she's right. Maybe Sophia would be better off without me." I set those papers down and looked my son in the eye. "David Miguel Valdez," I said, using his full name like I did when he was small and needed to understand something important. "Your father walked away from us because he was weak. I will not watch you do the same because someone convinced you that you are." "But Mom, what can I do? I can't afford the kind of lawyer she's hired. I can't fight this." "You won't have to," I said. "Because I'm going to fight it for you." The look on his face was pure shock. "Mom, you haven't practiced in years. You can't just." "I never stopped being a lawyer, son. I just stopped practicing. There's a difference." That night, I pulled out my old case files, my legal books, everything I'd packed away when I thought my fighting days were over. I studied family law updates, recent precedents, changes in custody statutes. I worked until my eyes burned and my back ached, fueled by rage and purpose and the memory of my granddaughter's terrified voice saying, "I don't want to lie." Miguel brought me the evidence piece by piece. Financial records showing unexplained deposits in Clara's account. Photos of her with the developer, timestamps showing their relationship started months before the separation. Most damning of all, audio recordings from a bug he'd placed in her car during one of his routine surveillance checks. I listened to her coaching Sophia over and over, each repetition making my blood boil hotter. Listened to her laugh with her boyfriend about how easy it was going to be to take that gimp for everything he's worth. Listened to her plan out how she'd sell the house and disappear with Sophia once the custody case was settled. By the time the court date arrived, I was ready for war. The family court in Milwaukee isn't the grandest building you'll ever see. Wood paneling that's seen better decades, fluorescent lights that flicker when the wind blows wrong, chairs that creak under the weight of broken dreams. But it's a sacred space nonetheless, a place where lives are rebuilt or destroyed based on evidence and argument, and the hope that justice still means something. I arrived early that morning, wearing my old courtroom suit, navy blue, professional, the same one I'd worn for my last case 23 years ago. It still fit, though the shoulders felt heavier now, weighted with responsibility and pain. Clara was already there with her lawyer, some hotshot from downtown with a $1,000 haircut and a smile that cost twice that. She looked confident, almost smug, dressed in soft pastels like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. When she saw me walk in, she actually laughed. "Oh good," she said loudly enough for half the courtroom to hear. David brought his mommy to fight his battles for him. I didn't respond. Didn't even look at her. Just took my seat at the defendant's table and began arranging my files. Let her think what she wanted. In about an hour, she'd understand the difference between a mother and a prosecutor. David hobbled in on his crutches, looking like a man walking to his own execution. The weight loss was noticeable. He'd dropped 20 pounds since the separation, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. Clara's lawyer was already building his case just by letting the judge see the contrast between the polished, put-together woman and the broken man who could barely walk straight. Judge Morrison took the bench at exactly 9 a.m. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, but his eyes were still sharp. When he called the case, when he looked down at the paperwork and saw my name listed as David's counsel, I watched recognition dawn across his face. "Mrs. Valdez," he said slowly, his voice carrying across the courtroom like a bell. "I haven't seen you in my courtroom it must be over 20 years. 23 years, Your Honor," I replied, standing with the kind of confidence I'd forgotten I possessed. "But justice doesn't have an expiration date." A murmur ran through the gallery. Clara's lawyer looked confused, clearly not having done his homework on opposing counsel. Clara herself had gone pale, finally sensing that something wasn't quite right. "For those who may not be aware," Judge Morrison continued, his tone taking on a weight that commanded attention, "Mrs. Valdez was one of the finest prosecutors this county ever saw. Her conviction rate was legendary, her integrity unquestioned. I'm surprised to see her here representing a defendant in a family matter." "I'm not here as a prosecutor today, Your Honor," I said. "Today, I'm simply a mother defending her son against lies, manipulation, and fraud." The word fraud hit that courtroom like a thunderclap. Clara's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making inflammatory statements without." "Overruled," Judge Morrison said quietly. "Mrs. Valdez knows better than to make accusations she can't prove." "Please proceed, Counselor." What followed was 3 hours of the most vicious legal combat I'd ever engaged in. Clara's lawyer painted David as a broken man, unstable and potentially dangerous. He showed medical records from the accident, testimony about David's mood changes, his inability to work the way he used to. "This man," he said, gesturing dramatically toward my son, "is a shadow of his former self. He's depressed, possibly suicidal, clearly unable to provide the stable environment a 7-year-old child needs." When it was my turn to cross-examine Clara, I watched her settle into the witness chair with that same smug confidence she'd worn all morning. She thought she had this locked up. Thought her performance as the concerned mother would be enough. I started gentle. Asked about the marriage, about life before the accident, about Sophia's relationship with her father. Let Clara relax, let her think this was going to be easy. "Mrs. Valdez," I said, using her married name like a blade, "you testified that you're concerned about your husband's mental state since the accident. Can you give us specific examples of behavior that worried you?" She launched into a rehearsed litany. David sleeping too much, not talking enough, being withdrawn and difficult. Textbook depression symptoms that could apply to anyone dealing with chronic pain and life changes. "And during this difficult time," I continued, "what did you do to support your husband through his recovery?" I did everything I could. Drove him to appointments, helped with his exercises." "I see. And how long did this supportive period last?" "Well, it's been ongoing." "Mrs. Valdez, let me be more specific. How long after the accident did you begin your relationship with Marcus Thompson?" The color drained from her face. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out a photograph. Miguel's work was always thorough. Clear image of Clara and a man I'd never seen before, taken 6 months after David's accident. They were kissing in the parking lot of an expensive restaurant. "Do you recognize this photograph?" Her lawyer was on his feet again. "Objection. Relevance. Your Honor, Mrs. Valdez's relationship with Mr. Thompson is directly relevant to her motives in this custody case, as well as her credibility as a witness." Overruled. The witness will answer. Clara stared at that photograph like it was a snake about to strike. That's not what it looks like." "What does it look like, Mrs. Valdez?" "Marcus is a friend. He was helping me through a difficult time. A friend who happens to be a real estate developer interested in acquiring your husband's construction business?" Another photograph. Bank records. Cell phone logs showing hundreds of calls and texts between them, starting just weeks after David's accident. "Mrs. Valdez, isn't it true that you and Mr. Thompson have been planning to acquire your husband's business assets through this divorce proceeding?" "That's ridiculous." Isn't it true that you've been systematically undermining your husband's confidence and mental health to build a case for his unfitness as a parent? No. Isn't it true that you've been coaching your 7-year-old daughter to lie about her father in order to secure custody? I would never. I pulled out the recording device. In the absolute silence of that courtroom, Clara's voice filled the air. He's going to ask who takes better care of you. And you're going to say, "Mommy, okay?" You're going to tell him that Daddy scares you sometimes. Sophia's small voice, confused and frightened, "But Mommy, Daddy doesn't scare me." Clara's response, cold as winter, "Then you'll lie if you love me." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps from the gallery, Clara's lawyer frantically objecting, Judge Morrison calling for order. But nothing could erase what we'd all just heard, a mother destroying her child's innocence for money. When the courtroom finally settled, Clara was sobbing in the witness chair. Not tears of remorse, but tears of fury and frustration. She'd been caught exposed, humiliated in front of everyone. "Mrs. Valdez," I said quietly, "do you have anything else to say about your fitness as a parent?" She couldn't speak. Just sat there crying, her perfect facade crumbling like wet cardboard. But I wasn't done. The kill shot was still coming. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Sophia Valdez to testify." The objections came fast and furious. Children her age rarely testified in custody cases. It was traumatic, unnecessary. But I'd done my homework. Under Wisconsin law, a child of 7 could testify if the court deemed it in the child's best interest to hear directly from them. Sophia took the stand in her little blue dress, the same one she'd worn to David's birthday party last month. She looked so small up there, so frightened. My heart broke for what I was about to put her through, but sometimes you have to open a wound to clean out the infection. Judge Morrison was gentle with her, explaining that she just needed to tell the truth about her feelings. When he asked who she wanted to live with, her answer was clear and immediate. "I want to live with Daddy and Grandma Rosa," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Mommy told me to lie about Daddy, but I don't want to lie anymore. Daddy never scares me. He reads me stories and helps me with my homework and gives the best hugs even when his leg hurts." The silence that followed was sacred. In that moment, truth spoke through the voice of a child, and everyone in that courtroom felt its power. When Sophia stepped down, when the judge called for closing arguments, I knew we'd won. But I needed to make sure Clara understood exactly what she'd lost. "Your Honor," I began, "this case isn't about disability or mental health or any of the smokescreens opposing counsel has tried to create. This case is about greed, manipulation, and the systematic destruction of a family for financial gain." I laid out the evidence piece by piece. The affair, the financial conspiracy, the emotional abuse, the coaching of a child to commit perjury. I showed how every accusation Clara had made was projection. She was the unstable one. She was the one unfit to parent. She was the one who'd put her own interests above her child's welfare. "My son isn't perfect," I said, looking directly at David as he sat there fighting back tears. "The accident changed him, challenged him, forced him to rebuild himself from the ground up. But he's still the same man who worked 18-hour days to build his family a future. He's still the father who gets up at midnight when Sophia has bad dreams, who never misses a school play despite the pain it causes him to sit in those tiny auditorium chairs. He's still the human being who deserves love and respect, not manipulation and betrayal." I turned to face Clara, letting her see the full force of my rage finally unleashed. "The plaintiff has tried to paint my son as broken, as less than he was before. But she's wrong. Yes, he walks differently now. Yes, he tires more easily. Yes, he's learned that life can change in an instant and nothing is guaranteed. But those aren't weaknesses, they're wisdom. They're compassion. They're the kind of lessons that make someone a better parent, not a worse one. Your Honor, I'm asking you to see through the lies and manipulation to the truth that a 7-year-old child has already recognized, that David Valdez is a good man, a loving father, and the parent who truly has Sophia's best interests at heart. Judge Morrison deliberated for less than 30 minutes. When he returned, his expression was grim. In 30 years on this bench, he began, I've seen families torn apart by poverty, addiction, abuse, and genuine neglect. But I've rarely seen such calculated cruelty as what's been presented here today. He looked directly at Clara. Mrs. Valdez, your actions in coaching your daughter to lie about her father constitute child abuse. Your manipulation of this court system for financial gain borders on fraud. Your treatment of your husband during his recovery demonstrates a lack of basic human compassion that makes me question your fitness to parent a goldfish, let alone a 7-year-old child. The verdict was swift and brutal. Full custody to David. The house and all marital assets to remain with him. Clara would be allowed supervised visits with Sophia twice a month, supervised by a court-appointed monitor. No alimony. No child support from David to Clara. A restraining order preventing Clara from coming within 500 feet of David's home or business. And most satisfying of all, an order requiring Clara to pay David's legal fees, even though I'd worked for free. When Clara heard the verdict, she lost what was left of her composure. Screamed that I'd destroyed her life, that the whole system was rigged, that she'd appeal and fight until her last breath. I walked over to where she stood sobbing and raging, and I spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. I didn't destroy your life, I said. You destroyed your own compassion. You had a good man who loved you, a beautiful daughter who trusted you, and a family that would have stood by you through anything. You threw it all away for money and spite. The only thing I did was make sure everyone could see what you really are. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my garden watching Sophia help David plant tomatoes. His limp is still noticeable, may always be, but he's stronger now. Not just physically, emotionally. The confidence Clara spent 2 years destroying has been rebuilt, brick by brick, day by day. Sophia still has nightmares sometimes. Still asks why mommy wanted her to lie. We're working through it together, all 3 of us, with the help of a good therapist who understands that healing takes time. Clara moved to Florida with her developer boyfriend. She calls occasionally, always wanting to negotiate more time with Sophia, always promising she's changed. Sophia talks to her because I believe children should know their parents, even flawed ones. But the supervised visits happen here, in our home, where Sophia feels safe. David's business is thriving again. Turns out that having survived the worst thing that could happen to him made him fearless about smaller challenges. He's hired good people, delegated the physical work, focused on design and planning. His reputation for integrity has brought him more clients than he can handle. And me? I'm back in the courtroom part-time, taking cases for people who can't afford the kind of lawyer Clara hired. Families being torn apart by greed and manipulation. Children whose voices need amplifying. The forgotten and the underestimated. I learned something in that courtroom that day, something I'd forgotten during my quiet years of family law practice. Truth doesn't just speak, it roars. And when it does, when it finally breaks free from the silence that's been choking it, heaven and earth move to listen. People ask me if I'm proud of destroying Clara's life. If I feel guilty about the way things ended. They don't understand that I didn't destroy anything. I simply held up a mirror and made everyone look at what was already there. In life, lies may win the first round. They might even win several rounds. They're louder than truth, flashier, more appealing to people who want easy answers to complex problems. But truth always stands at the final bell. Always. And when it does, when it finally gets its chance to speak, no amount of money or manipulation or pretty lies can stand against it. If you were in my position, would you have stayed silent? Would you have let your child be destroyed by someone who promised to love and cherish him? Would you have let your granddaughter learn that lying was acceptable if it served someone else's agenda? Or would you have done what I did, dusted off your old armor, sharpened your forgotten weapons, and walked back into battle one more time for the people you love most in this world? The answer to that question might just reveal who you really are when the silence finally screams.